an actress in 2013. Now, in what may become a historic breakthrough, North Korea has told South Korea's presidential envoys in Pyongyang that it is open to talks with the United States on ending its nuclear efforts. The two Koreas have also agreed to hold summit talks next month. Our Chief Blue House correspondent Moon Gon-young with the details.
South and North Korea have agreed to hold the third Leaders' Summit at Peace House in Panmunjom in late April. For this, we agreed to hold working-level talks.
The Peace House is a building that sits on the South Korean side of the so-called Truce Village that straddles the border. And if the summit is held here, it would mark the first time a North Korean leader has stepped on South Korean soil since the end of the Korean War in early 1950s. South Korea's chief presidential envoy to North Korea briefed the press Tuesday night just hours after a charter flight carrying the 10-member delegation returned home following a two-day visit to North Korea. In a remarkable development that followed unprecedented talks in Pyongyang, South Korea said North Korea is willing to talk to the U.S. about giving up its nuclear weapons and has agreed to refrain from conducting nuclear and missile tests while engaging in dialogue. Before South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet for the first inter-Korean summit in over a decade, the two sides will, for the first time, open a communication hotline by which Moon and Kim will be able to reach each other directly.
North Korea clearly stated its willingness to denuclearize. It also clarified that it had no reason to retain nuclear weapons if the military threat to North Korea is resolved and regime security is guaranteed.
It's a positive statement that caught many by surprise, but when parsed, comes with significant caveats. Pyongyang's reference to eliminating military threat against the regime could run counter to U.S. priorities, which has 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea.
Along with Seo-hun, director of the National Intelligence Service, and others, I will soon be visiting the U.S. to explain the outcome of our North Korea visit. We also plan to visit China and Russia following the U.S. trip.
Despite the caveats, the agreements represent a significant diplomatic accomplishment for South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who used the Winter Olympic Games to engineer thawing relations with the North that had previously seemed a distant prospect. Moon Gon-young, Arirang News, the Blue House.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump says the meeting between President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un has the potential to be a great thing for the world. But Washington remains cautious about North Korea's overtures and has pledged to continue its pressure campaign for the time being. Kwon Jang-oh reports.
We'll see what happens. That's the US president's reaction on hearing that North Korea is open to talks with the United States. Later, he also tweeted, for the first time in many years, a serious effort is being made by all parties concerned. Maybe false hope, but the US is ready to go hard in either direction. It's a sentiment he repeated later, but he was also quick to credit his administration and himself for bringing about the current situation.
I think that they are sincere, but I think they're sincere also because the sanctions and what we're doing with respect to North Korea, including, the great help that we've been given from China.
Trump declined to comment on whether he had any preconditions for talks, simply calling it a very tenuous situation. Vice President Mike Pence, meanwhile, stressed that although they will see which way talks go, in the meantime, the campaign of sanctions and pressure will continue until they see, quote, credible, verifiable and concrete steps towards denuclearization. US intelligence officials also reiterated this stance while expressing doubt over whether the current situation could be considered a significant breakthrough.
Hope springs eternal, but we need to learn a lot more relative to these talks. North Korea has to agree to not possess nuclear capability. And until that happens, we cannot have an agreement with them. And that is our position.
South Korea's presidential envoys who met with Kim Jong-un will travel to the US on Thursday to directly brief Washington on the outcome of their visit and further explore the possibility for US-North Korea talks. Kwon Jang-oh, Arirang News.
Now, let's get an expert's take on the upcoming Inter-Korean summit and North Korea's apparent decision to make so many concessions to South Korea and the United States. Joining us on the line is Professor Kim Hyunwook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy in Seoul. So, Professor, I'd like to start with Pyongyang's motives. Does this move by North Korea signal a real change in their policies, or is it merely a ruse to buy more time to work on their nuclear missile programs?
I think the agreement itself signals a very positive perspective. I mean, North Korea has expressed a very clear messages that it is willing to denuclearize itself. And as the media news has reported, the President Trump also expressed a positive wishes for the dialogue between North Korea and the United States. But the thing is that I think North Korea is eager to have a dialogue with North Korea because of the current U.S. hardline policies towards North Korea. But as it has desired to have its nuclear weapons for the domestic power consolidations, I'm not sure if it's willing to pursue a process to denuclearize itself. So I think the process and dialogue between North Korea and the United States, we have to see how it goes. It's too early to call whether it will be really successful in the future.
And with the reopening of dialogue with North Korea, many people are wondering if the intense international sanctions you touched upon finally broke the regime and is forcing Kim Jong-un to the table. How big of an influence do you think the sanctions had, and what financial rewards do you think the North will be looking for?
The sanctions definitely have worked. I mean, the sanctions really have made a lot of people inside North Korea concerned and complaining about the North Korean regime, especially the people who are exporting and importing, commodities from China and selling them out to the informal markets in North Korea are complaining a lot about the sanctions and the economic situations. So I think the sanctions definitely have worked. But the thing is that sanctions will continue. That's what the U.S. officials are saying. So even though dialogue is opening, I don't think the sanctions would be reduced or softened or lifted. So I'm not sure if there will be any rewards, financial, economic rewards to North Korea possible. If there will be some attempts for that kind of rewards by South Korea, I don't think the U.S. would really agree with that.
Okay, and Professor, President Moon Jae-in deserves an awful lot of credit for laying the groundwork for this summit. You could also say that President Trump, through his unusually strong rhetoric, unpredictability and policy of maximum pressure his administration has been pursuing, has really helped as well. What are your thoughts on Trump in particular? And do you think if next month's summit goes well, do you see much of a prospect for President Trump to actually hold face-to-face talks with Kim Jong-un?
I think the North Korea and the U.S. dialogue could start before the summit meeting between North Korea and the South Korea. U.S. expressed its willingness to talk with North Korea. Maybe the preliminary talk with North Korea to see what North Korea is thinking about denuclearization. Maybe North Korea and the U.S. can meet and talk about the future processes of denuclearization. I'm not sure if these kinds of talk would be satisfying the U.S. positions because the U.S. is saying that it would not repeat the past government's, mistakes. So we have to see how it goes. But the thing is that the summit meeting between North and South Korea is very early. It's April, or late April. And I don't think any substantial progress in denuclearization between North Korea and the United States before the summit meeting is not possible. So some kinds of concern I have is, okay, we will have a summit meeting in April, late April. And afterwards, what if the U.S. and North Korea denuclearization talk is broken? In that case, the U.S. and South Korea would have to take a different path towards North Korea, which is a big concern for me.
Okay, well, I can kind of get a sense of what your answer might be, but before we let you go, many people are feeling really upbeat about these latest developments. Do you share their sense of optimism?
Yes, the agreement itself, the agreement between the North Korea and South Korea itself is very optimistic. At least North Korea and South Korea have agreed upon the summit meeting, and also they agreed upon the denuclearization talk with the United States. So from the South Korean perspective, the North-South relations and the U.S.-North Korea talk, it's all possible in the future. The thing is how the process goes on and what substantial outcome would come out of it. That's something we have to pay attention continuously in the future.
Well, we await those envoys making a trip to Washington on Thursday, I believe, to explain the outcome of the summit and also the big summit itself that's happening at the end of April. Going to be remarkable watching that. Well, thank you very much, Professor, for your insights there. We appreciate it. Now, in semi-related news, President Moon Jae-in will hold a luncheon meeting at the Blue House on Wednesday with the leaders of South Korea's 5 major political parties. According to the senior presidential secretary for political affairs, Han Byung-do, all 5 leaders of the ruling and opposing parties accepted President Moon's invitation. They are expected to hold in-depth discussions on issues concerning inter-Korean relations and peace on the Korean Peninsula. It's the first time the leaders of all the major parties have accepted the president's invitation since he took office in May of last year. Now, with the ongoing probe into former President Lee Myung-bak over a series of allegations of bribery and other irregularities, prosecutors have summoned Lee to appear for questioning next week. Lee's elder brother and former lawmaker Lee Sang-duk, suspected of receiving illicit funds in 2007, he's going to be interrogated today. Our Kim Hyun-wook tells us more.
Prosecutors have summoned former President Lee Myung-bak over allegations of accepting bribes amounting to more than $9 million. Lee has been asked to appear for questioning at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office on March 14th, as the prosecution has concluded that the time has come to speak with the former leader to uncover the truth in a transparent and effective manner. It also explained that enough investigative information has been collected and it's time to interrogate Lee face-to-face, hinting that the investigation is nearing its end. While Lee has expressed a willingness to comply with the summons, his aide stated that the former president wants to reschedule the date. Lee's elder brother and former lawmaker Lee Sang-duk will also appear for questioning on Wednesday for allegedly receiving illicit funds in 2007. Prosecutors suspect he received nearly $750,000 in election funds from a former CEO of Uri Financial Group. Kim Hyun-wook, Arirang News.
Now, yet more shocking revelations as the Me Too movement continues to take Korea by storm. Award-winning film director Kim Ki-duk is the latest to be accused of physical and sexual abuse by actresses he worked with in the past. Speaking on an investigative news program on Tuesday, a former actress said Kim sexually harassed her multiple times during pre-production for a film she was cast in. During the production, she accused the filmmaker of forcing her into unwanted and unscripted sex scenes and slapped her repeatedly and raped her on the set of the 2013 movie Mobius before replacing her with another actress. The internationally famed director has picked up prizes at the Cannes, Venice and Berlin film festivals. The ongoing trade spat between US President Donald Trump and the European Union has spilled over to the automobile industry now. Trump has responded to Brussels' counter-tariff threats against US imports with plans to launch his own measures now on European cars. Lee Seung-jae with the details.
The back and forth of tariff threats between US President Donald Trump and the European Union rumbles on, with Trump now threatening to impose heavy tariffs on all European cars. His response comes as the EU threatened to slap hefty tariffs on American import goods such as Levi's jeans, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and bourbon whiskey. This is the latest indication that President Trump is standing by his decision to impose a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports globally, despite pressure from home and abroad. The U.S. leader has long seized on what he believes to be unfair trade barriers, citing that European cars can be seen everywhere on the streets of New York, but few American cars are ever spotted on European expressways. But stronger tariffs on European cars could hurt the U.S. as well. BMW President Harald Kruger warned such tariffs would hurt jobs in the world's second-largest car market, mentioning its plant located in South Carolina. According to the German Automobile Industry Association, German automakers exported some 500,000 cars to the U.S. last year, but also increased production at their U.S. factories, where they employ tens of thousands of people. This comes as U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said on Tuesday that Mexico and Canada won't be affected by the steel and aluminum tariffs if NAFTA renegotiations are successful. President Trump tweeted on Monday morning that the tariffs will not apply to their neighbors if NAFTA talks go well, adding that Canada must treat U.S. farmers better and that Mexico must do much more on stopping drugs from pouring into the U.S. The world waits to see if President Trump does indeed go forward with this tariff proposal and how it will affect the global economy. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, in Seoul, passengers pay a minimum of 3,000 won when they take a taxi. But that basic fare is expected to rise substantially this year. It's hoped that the increase will improve taxi drivers' working conditions. The capital's residents, however, seem generally unhappy about the plan. Our Park Hee-jun went to gauge some public opinion and filed this report.
The Seoul Metropolitan Government is in the process of hiking the basic taxi fare within the city. At present, it's 3,000 won or $2.80, but the city government is pushing to raise the fare to either 3,900 or 4,500 won. The plan is being considered to reflect inflation and to enhance taxi drivers' working conditions by raising their relatively low income.
The Seoul city government promised to raise taxi fares every 2 years, but they've remained the same for many years now. It's already overdue, and especially with inflation, I think a higher fare is reasonable.
Seoul City recognizes the need to raise taxi fares, and it says the increase will be followed by better service. But the public who think that taking a cab is already expensive as it is appear to have a relatively negative opinion of the plan.
Raising the basic fare would be burdensome for students and the unemployed. I think more people would prefer to use public transportation, and it would end up negatively affecting the taxi industry.
The government is also pushing to extend nighttime charges. The extra charges are currently applied at midnight, but the starting point is likely to be pulled down to 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Many Seoulites dislike the idea, as living in a city that never sleeps often requires them to grab a cab late at night.
As a student, I don't take taxis often at night. But if the new plan is implemented, I definitely won't be taking them at all late at night.
If nighttime charges are extended, wouldn't that force young people to go home earlier? I personally like that idea. But still, 10 p.m. is too early, as many people in Seoul use transportation until very late at night.
Extending the period of nighttime charges will affect many people, especially students whose classes end late. I would also want to go home earlier to avoid paying extra costs.
If the policy takes effect, it would be the first hike in 5 years and the largest increase since 2001. Although the policy is still under discussion, the fare increase is likely to be implemented this year, possibly in July after the local elections. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Now, let's look at some headlines making stories around the world. Let's start in Britain. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has issued a warning to Russia after the mysterious collapse of a former Russian spy and his daughter in the south of England. For more on this and other international news, let's turn to our Noah Adam. So, Adam, this former spy and his daughter, they remain critically ill in hospital. The word on everyone's lips, or what they want to know, is the Kremlin responsible?
That's right, Mark. Well, Britain seems to be convinced Moscow is behind the apparent poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. They were both found on a bench outside a shopping centre in Salisbury on Sunday. Skripal is a former double agent convicted in 2006 of passing the identities of Russian agents in Europe to MI6. Foreign Secretary Johnson's suspicion towards Moscow comes from the fact that it echoes the murder of another Russian ex-spy, Alexander Litvinenko, in 2006. A British inquiry concluded that President Putin may have approved the poisoning of Litvinenko, a ruling Moscow described as a, quote, politicised farce. Speaking to Parliament on Tuesday, Johnson issued a stark warning and even threatened to pull England out of this year's World Cup if Russia is found guilty of an attempt at Skripal's life.
While it would be wrong to prejudge the investigation, I can reassure the House that should evidence emerge that implies state responsibility, then Her Majesty's government will respond appropriately and robustly. Thinking ahead to the World Cup this July, this summer, I think it will be very difficult to imagine that UK representation at that event could go ahead in the normal way, and we would certainly have to...
Russia was quick to deny involvement, and Moscow's foreign ministry said Johnson's comments were, quote, wild. The country's embassy in London also said the incident was being used to demonise Russia, and it was seriously concerned about how the British media were reporting the incident. Meanwhile, counter-terrorism police are now leading the investigation, though they said they believe there is no risk to the public. The UN Security Council is set to meet on Wednesday to discuss the failed implementation of its resolution calling for a 30-day ceasefire in Syria. Britain and France requested the closed-door meeting that comes amid continued shelling by pro-government forces on the rebel-held area of eastern Ghouta. The truce was meant to allow delivery of humanitarian aid and provide a safe passage for civilians to evacuate. On Monday, at least 80 people were killed in airstrikes and artillery fire, making it the deadliest day in the region since the UNSC's demand for a ceasefire about 2 weeks ago. In total, more than 800 lives have been lost since pro-regime forces intensified their offensive on eastern Ghouta. The CEO of Kobe Steel, Japan's third-largest steelmaker, has announced that he will be resigning to take responsibility for a data fraud scandal that affected hundreds of clients worldwide. Following a prolonged apologetic bow, Hiroya Kawasaki said Tuesday that he will step down on April 1st. His successor is to be named in the near future. The firm admitted last year that it supplied products with false strength and quality data to about 500 customers, throwing global supply chains into turmoil. US consumers filed a class action lawsuit earlier this week, the first complaint to be filed in America for an issue that started in the 1970s.
Good morning. It's another day with higher than seasonal average temperatures. The nation can continue to enjoy pleasant early spring weather along with good air quality, but big gaps in temperatures will continue across much of the nation. And Seoul will get up to 10 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Daegu, Busan, and Daejeon will also top out at 10 degrees. But the skies will not be as clear, with rain in the forecast on Jeju and southern coastal regions starting late tonight before spreading to the rest of the country by Thursday. So Seoul will also receive a mix of rain and sleet overnight, which will bring down temperatures a couple notches for the next couple of days. But I can tell you, starting next week, we should feel the more warmth of spring. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. Well, the nation will be overcast all day with relatively mild temperatures. Some parts of North Korea will see snow and clouds. And as for the rest of Asia, those of you in Tokyo will need to dress warmly today. There's been a big drop in temperatures, and the highs will only make it to 8 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, Melbourne had a cool start to the morning on their first day of autumn, but highs will still be near 30 degrees Celsius under mostly sunny skies. And heading to North America, New York could see between 6 and 8 inches of snow Wednesday, with a winter storm warning being issued. And as for South America, most cities will have a repeat of Tuesday's weather conditions. Taking you to Europe, wintry weather does not want to go away in Berlin, with a mix of rain and snow in the forecast for Wednesday. And lastly, to Africa, sunny and warm weather continues in Cape Town, along with strong winds, while the city has repeated its call for locals to continue to save drinking water. And that's all the weather update for now.
And that's where we're going to leave the news for now as well. Our next bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.